it really helps to put yourself in the shoes of the online student on the other end of the screen. And one of the first things to understand about their experience is just that online learning demands a higher level of self-direction and discipline for your student. When you show up to class, there's a lot of things that happen that we don't think about in a residential classroom, just that just kind of happen automatically. And even the sense of sitting with a whole bunch of other people creates a sense of positive peer pressure and accountability. And a lot of that's left, is gone in the online classroom. You lose the four walls and the clock and everything that kind of orients you to time and accountability and space. And you're carrying a little more weight on your shoulders. And that's, I think, a good thing that students are carrying the weight and ownership of their learning experience. But it is more difficult, and people are at different places developmentally, especially younger folks may be in a very different space when it comes down to their capacity for self-direction and self-discipline than someone who's just had more years under their belt. Distance students lose the immediacy of the live classroom, like the sense of presence. And that's where, being able to be consistent. Like I love the Monday check-in, the Monday email that I send out to my students and say, hey, this is what's most important this week. So they have that regular touch, and then also scheduling some check-ins with my students where they know I care and that they're accountable to me as the instructor. Imagine what lateness looks like in an environment where immediacy is gone. So lateness of turning in assignments, or even I think of like lateness of showing up to class. Once I was in a class recording the classroom, and the students were talking, and they turned around and talked to me and said, "Yeah, this professor is always like 5-10 minutes late." And I was like, "Oh, that's not good." And I could also tell they weren't taking the class very seriously. And so when you're prompt in your communication, when you're consistent in your communication, it really creates a culture of accountability in the classroom. Students take you and the course more seriously. Online learners have diverse learning needs. And I think a lot of times this is easier to spot online. In the face-to-face classroom, some studies have been done that show that only about 10% of students really speak up, and most of the conversations between them and the professor. And you can observe from what people are saying they're learning, but the other 90%, it can be hard to observe what's really going on. In the online classroom, everyone's participating, everyone's submitting things and in online discussions, and it's a bit more observable in a lot of ways. And so I think just paying attention to the differences in your students really helps. Distance is dangerous because we tend to generate inaccurate caricatures of our students. So as an online instructor, I realized that I was building almost projections of who my students were. And so, and that they were inaccurate. And a lot of times they were negative. So I did a couple things. I got a couple best practices here that I think are going to help you connect with your students so that doesn't happen to you, that they, instead of being two-dimensional, your students are more three-dimensional. First best practice is I keep an avatar student. I think through kind of an amalgamation of several students that I've had, what their life looks like, their family looks like, how old they are, what they're struggling with, what their strengths are. And it helps me to kind of come back to that. Another thing I do is I print off a list of my students and I write notes. Like if I learn something about that student in an online discussion, I'll jot it down, like their grandma just had surgery and is not doing well, prayer requests, things like that. And that helps me keep my heart connected to my students so that caricature thing doesn't happen. I'll read that last bullet. Connected instructors feel connected. Consequently, they create a virtuous cycle of connection for themselves and their learners. But generating that momentum requires a commitment to get the flywheel spinning. So what I mean by this is that if you are connecting with your students, you're really putting energy in at the very beginning of your term or your course, that's gonna get a flywheel of connection spinning. And you're going to, as you interact with your students, you're going to be more present. They can tell you care. It's really going to bear fruit throughout the entire course. If you start in a reactive way, in an ad hoc way of communication, without a plan, without consistency, you're not going to feel connected to your students. And that flywheel is going to, like, if you try to get that flywheel going mid-term or mid-course, it's going to feel really heavy and difficult to do. So early in the semester, really getting connected with your students, taking those notes is going to bear a lot of fruit and make things a lot easier for you as you go about your course.